Just would like to let everyone know who is listening that the session from this point on will be recorded, and the recording may be used by the Palestine Museum US to publish it on social media and other places. And by continuing to participate in this session at this point, you hereby agree to use of the recording as we explained. If you are not in agreement with that, you may leave the program at your will. Thank you. I know some people who have raised their hands, so I'm going to ask you if you could put comments in the chat file about what's the reason you're raising your hand. We have a large number of audience, and it's pretty difficult to track everyone. Okay. Both of you guys are using the same link. Um, so okay, no, outside this Jenna, can you unmute yourselves, please?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Janice Hawken and Jennifer Ruth, welcome, and thank you so much for this great film. Before we get started, a lot of people had questions related to how do we get to see the film again and how do we screen it for our groups, etc. The film has a website called Palestine Exception Film.com. And you can
Let me put it in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
And that website gives you information about the film. You can watch a trailer, and you could also request a screening, and people will respond back to you.
Exactly.
This is the second time we screened the film, and today we had 400 households that watched the film, which is more than the first time.
Yeah.
That's what happens when we show a film again. We get more people than the first time because then people see it first, and then they want their friends and other people to watch it again with them, etc. And then this word spreads by mouth, by word of mouth, and by some of the social media. So we're very glad to have our film directors with us here, and Krista, my co-host, is not available today. She had a commitment. She has to speak at the Capitol building in Madison, Wisconsin. So that was something she couldn't turn down, of course. So let me ask just a general question to the film directors. What kind of feedback and reactions are you getting to the film? I know the film has been screened in a few places, um, and it's going to be screened more, I imagine. So, what what can you tell us about what you're hearing from people?
I'm answering one of the chat questions. So Jan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. I mean, our first screen, we finished the film in mid-November, and we had made a commitment to many groups around the country and supporters to have this film, which we started early this year, early in 2024, to have it completed by the fall, which was a big ask. I mean, a big task for a feature film, but we wanted it to be available as groups gathered again in the fall. Particularly campus organizers around the Justice for Palestine movement, and to have a way of holding social memory. And that's how we think about this and some of my previous films as forms of social memory, because there have been glimpses here on the news over the past year of campus protests and actions, the encampments, of course, but then those are fleeting moments. So we wanted to be able to both have a have a document, a record of this history that is so marginalized, the Palestinian exception as it was enacted this last year is excluding the history of Palestine from so much of academia and politics in this country, but also to learn from this, the history of the protests and this movement that's been ongoing, but particularly active over the last year. And I think initially there was this first screening at our university, which was an enormous celebration of the accomplishment of the film and validating the activism on campus, the activists, but also that I think maybe you would add to this, Jennifer, there's a lot of grief and sadness and fear, as well as anger and outrage. And I think we had expected the film and developed the concept of the film as opening that kind of space for the range of feelings that are part of what's unfolded over the last year and a half or so. So I think it's provided a space for that, but also discussing what's ahead and strategizing how do we build and broaden this movement.
Yeah, I think I would add that we really want it to be an organizing tool. So one of some of the feedback we're getting is requests for screenings from organizations or campus groups, campus departments, uh, Arab councils, JVP chapters, because they want to keep some momentum. Because, well, two things. I think when we finished it very quickly, we did it very quickly, and so when we first started screening it, we haven't done that many, but starting in late November, there was this sense of grief pervasive and fear, as Jan said. And one of the things that the film seemed to do for students, at least, because it's a film so focused on higher ed and campuses in particular. The Palestine Exception, of course, extends in every sector of the health industry, everywhere, but we were looking at higher ed. Is that there was a sense of remembering, yeah, like what Jan said, what the activists accomplished. Instead of all of the demonizing, scapegoating, smearing, the propaganda around these are terrorist students, they're woke snowflakes who have a lot of money at Columbia, all of the misinformation around the students and faculty who supported Palestine on campuses last year. In the face of all that misinformation, all of the disciplining, even FBI being called in at Yale, in the face of all of that onslaught, there was a kind of exhaustion when we first started screening. And the beautiful thing for us was seeing that it reminded people that they were on the right side of history. And so if I could just add one and sort of get some of their energy back, and then now hopefully use it for organizing tools to regain momentum this year in the face of, a lot of sense of uncertainty regarding the Trump administration. If I could also just mention too, Jan and I are, Jan had made quite a few documentaries. My area is academic freedom, and that's how I got interested in this issue. Jan and I were working together on something around the attacks on critical race theory when we decided to pivot to the attacks on pro-Palestinian speech and the so-called anti-Israel narratives. We pivoted to that. And so it's been a real gratifying for us to learn so much about this from the activists and the scholars that we interviewed, and to, for me to really realize the degree to which how deep the exception goes and is going. And so I feel like, as not a Palestinian, not an Israeli, not Jewish, I feel like what I learned made it very clear to me there's not a both sides thing. There's a genocide, there's a dispossession in 1948, and there's an ongoing Nakba and an ongoing genocide. And so if we can try and get that help with the delegitimization of Israel's propaganda and support faculty and students and activists and community organizations. That's what we want to do.
Thank you. One of the most infuriating things that we saw during the film is the hearing, the congressional hearing, when they were talking to the heads of the major universities, and that certainly got a lot of people so ticked off to see how mild response the university people were, and they were kind of very wimpy. So I'm going to ask both of you. I know everybody kind of there's a consensus about the response, but um, has there been any further discussions about that around the country? And what are people's what are the new people in charge of the universities any different? Are we still seeing?
Absolutely not.
Um,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
I'm finished.
they're not different. And I think what we're facing, I mean, the higher ed was already under attack. Tenure, the right wing, the political appointees in Florida and elsewhere taking over New College. A lot of things were exposed that were probably that have been true for a long time. The degree to which donors and boards of trustees really run the show, not administrators or faculty. That, I mean, that's been true to some degree always, but the myth, the narrative is supposed to be that the universities are this other space that aren't dictated by political interests or commercial interests. And so while everyone always kind of took that with a grain of salt, that's been so profoundly exposed over this last year, the degree to which moneyed interests and political interests determine the degree to which we can pursue speech and research and scholarship. So given that, I only see a hardening of the lines between administrators who are hired and fired and live their lives by donors and boards of trustees, and the rest of us, faculty and students and staff, who are disempowered. And to me, the only future is coalition building, solidarity, labor union building with people also in the public community in order to push against this is very clearly the people who have power, and that is the donors, the board members, and the very top administrators who live in fear of those people.
I wanted to, Faisal, if I could just add a point to what Jennifer has said. Both of us have had most of our careers in academia, also as activists, but as scholars and interested in the campus as a site of both. And I think what we brought to this film was the campus as a site for much of our history of both rebellion or resistance on the one hand and repression on the other, as a site of knowledge production where young people are exploring new ways of thinking about the world, ways of understanding more deeply and critically claims in the dominant propaganda they've been exposed to. Also sites of military research. And so as sites of knowledge production, often critical thinking, there also have been sites for a very long time, and we've seen a more intensive chapter of that this past year and a half of massive repression. So we wanted to show the hopeful side of that too, that as the forces of repression become more intense, often more desperate, the crackdowns, there is also openings in that for resistance and for pushing back. So for us, it wasn't enough to just document this history, but also to learn from it and the power that young people have, particularly who can if they're able to organize themselves effectively to push back on this.
Thank you. A note for the audience. I will begin bringing people on the panel, people who would like to ask a question or say a few comments. provided that everybody be brief, please, since we have a large audience. But we do want to give people opportunity to talk and ask questions. So if your hand is raised for another reason, please lower it for now because we're not able to deal with that. So I'm looking for people who want to come on the panel and ask a question or make a comment. In the meantime, Jennifer and Janice, if you see something in the chat or the Q&A that you'd like to pick up on, please do so as I manage some of the requests here.
Yeah, I really appreciate the feedback that we're getting about, when you're living in this stuff and you're trying to figure out how to place it in relationship to place contemporary events in relationship to past events, you sort of start to take for granted that everyone knows about Kent State. Everyone knows that's a young Biden. But of course, everything is coming much more quickly for the first time in this succession. So it sounds like I really appreciate the feedback about wanting more labeling of when things are and where things are and who people are. I appreciate that. Yeah, but I also want to comment that, the opportunism, the right-wing opportunism and the combination between Christian Zionists and right-wing opportunists is terrifying. And that's what we saw in Congress to a degree that we hadn't seen or been aware of before. Christian Zionism has been around for a while, but for Elise Stefanik and others to really be full-throated about it, like when Manish Shafiq was being questioned, was pretty shocking.
Thank you. We have Nabil Sater. Nabil, tell us who you are, where you are, and what you're thinking.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Faisal. My name is Nabil Abdel Sater. I'm from Lebanon. I live in Detroit, Bloomfield Hills to be more precise. And I've been a friend of this show here for a long time. So needless to go through the introduction, a couple of things. First of all, is Ted on? Is Ted Khoury on?
Not today.
Okay. The only reason I'm mentioning because Ted's cousin is a very, very dear friend of mine. And his mother, Hala Ajlouni, who was a Nakba survivor, used to live across the street, across from me exactly. So we're very, very close friends. And his cousin is Hussam Ajlouni, Sam Ajlouni. So they're very, like I said, they're very, very, very close friends of mine. Anyway, the thing is, he told me about it last week, and I'm sorry I missed it. So here I am now. The one thing I want to say, I say this almost every time I watch a documentary. And I've seen thousands of them. I've been activist for 35 plus years. That every time I watch a documentary, we always, for the right reason, always end up saying the same thing, most of us. This is the best thing I have seen. This is powerful. They're all powerful. Most of them are powerful, right? But the sad part is that every time I watch a documentary, I feel like this is the first time I'm seeing the subject. But it's so shocking that after I've seen 1,000 of them, every time I watch one, I say, I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this, right? It is the question, I don't want to, and a lot of people are asking questions here. The question that I have for you is, I'm a member of JVP. I've been a member of JVP for 17 years. Okay, so I'm quite active in the Detroit area with very similar. We had Ilan Pape here. We're bringing Peter Beinart. So we have a lot of activities here. What would be, you think, the best effective way to get this, things like this, and maybe Faisal can be the quote unquote host, to try to bring this to like a large university audience? Because I have connections with U of D, connections with Wayne State, and some connections with U of M. Because the people that need to see this, we keep talking about this, is the younger generation. Mm-hmm. As passionate as we are and dedicated as we are, they are the ones that are going to be carrying the torch, right? So what would be, like I said, I've been doing organizing and webinars and this for a long time, but what would be something that you guys would recommend if we were to do some, and by the way, can we do it, launch it at multiple campuses at the same time? So for example, if I go to U of D, Wayne State, and U of M saying on Monday, February 25th, we're going to be broadcasting this movie for all three campuses at the same time. Is that something that can be done?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. Would you please get in contact with us and we can work together on, and with Faisal, because it takes a lot of different people with a
I
lot
know,
of different
I
connections
know,
to make
I
these
know.
kinds of
And
things
Faisal
happen.
has all my contact info.
I could
Okay, great.
I could set up the technology for you. So
Say it again.
I could set up the technology. That means I'll bring my laptop and I could do it from it. So
And
That'd be
and,
Faisal, come
fantastic.
and have another breakfast when you come here. So,
and I'm happy to moderate the session. So and
Thank you.
promote it and get people from around the world to watch also the
Mhm.
sure. So let's take it offline. I don't want to take up a lot of free time. Just connect with Faisal. I'll talk to Faisal on the phone or by whatever, and then we'll see how we can do something to simulcast and to multiple universities at the same time, and maybe churches even, because I'm also connected to the Unitarian Church
Yes,
and the Lutheran Church, and many of them here.
thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you,
If I
Nabil.
could just underscore one thing Nabil said, which is that the students are going to have to take up the torch, but they also really need to know that there are older people who see them and are not taken in by the propaganda about them and know what they've suffered, because they are the ones who, I mean, the suffering is obviously, and they're the first to say, doesn't compare to the suffering on the West Bank and in Gaza. The students are the first to say it, but they're getting things like slapped with $5,000 fines, slapped with suspension of, slapped with expulsion, withholding of their transcripts. I know people who had grad school fellowships who then had it withdrawn because the university sent something that held on to their transcript. So the students need to know that we see them and we want to support them for sure.
Okay, so Jennifer, just really quickly to that, I work with Palestine Legal. We had a big fundraising for Palestine Legal back in October, I think. So what I mean by that is also support Palestine. I'm from Lebanon myself, and my family is there.
Yeah, you meant
They
them.
were under the bombs too. We had to, move
Yeah,
place to place. So people like me who are fully vested there and fully vested here have a stake in both, both places. And we
yeah.
can speak to these things. And to the last point in here, when we talk to students, and I always say that to them, even at the JVP, I said, we want you guys to take the lead, but know that we are resources behind the scenes with knowledge and background and history and all that stuff. And we're here to help you. So you've got to be at the forefront, leading the charge. And we're always behind you. We're always supporting.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you,
Can I
Nabil.
just respond briefly to the questions about, is it available online? It's not available online and probably won't be for about a year, because once you have it available online, it's a whole different distribution avenue. And our strategy now is to make it available for groups to gather, to watch it as a group, to have discussions and strategize. Once you have it online, it kind of takes it out of those spaces. But
Apologize. I said a few months, but Jan knows better about how distribution works.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn, let's try to be a bit brief because there are a lot of people.
Faisal, you were on, Miko Peled reported about the Irish embassy, the Israelis leaving it, and you taking it over. Did you know that?
No, I
The
didn't
other
know.
night. Yeah.
There's-
You're
this-
famous, Faisal.
That's wow,
But,
it's viral.
yeah. I wanted to bring up something about Lebanon for one thing. In Boulder, I'm an advocate for adaptive reuse of properties rather than them getting demolished.
You
As,
want to introduce yourself?
pardon?
You say, tell us who you are and so.
Oh, Lynn from Boulder. So I advocate for, these buildings being saved, but there was this one building that's owned by this Lebanese guy, George from Beirut. And I was actually happy when they decided to demolish it because it gave him a few $1 million of reparations that we certainly owe him. So it's kind of put me at odds with myself. But I wanted to ask the group if anyone has any ideas of what we can do in Boulder, because people are very adamant about the Palestinian justice. And so there have been kind of big uproars at the city council chambers, and they actually, and I don't go down there physically because I'm so cold in my house in the winter that I just stay. But I wanted to go down because you can only see PowerPoints that people bring if you go live in the chambers itself. The two rooms downstairs where they threw everybody out to You can't see that. So I went all the way down there for nothing because then I couldn't see the PowerPoints of the presenters. So
Okay.
I'm kind of at odds with my own people. Of course, I support the Palestinian cause, and I don't want to be thrown out of the chambers because there's outrage. But they really need to like do these resolutions. It's like what you folks are saying from the academic community. They have to listen to the public, and they don't. The Boulder City Council is legendary for not listening. So what do we do? Because they're right now they're in a pause for through January 23rd, at least my daughter's birthday, that they won't that they aren't going to hold live meetings at all.
Right. Any of the Jennifer and Janice, do you want to respond to this, or shall we move on?
Just to mention that I have a couple of friends at Boulder who are interested in bringing a screening to the campus and also to a community organization in Denver that's very active in raising money for charities in Palestine. So Lynn, I'd be happy to connect with you offline about bringing the film and how we might help bring it to the politicians' attention. If I could respond to something in the chat, someone was asked, the university administrators, which Faisal brought up, a number of people have commented on and wanted to know why they were so spineless and pathetic. And I think I've been in higher ed my whole life. I've had administrative roles at times. And so I have I have a pretty good sense of how higher ed works by now. They are afraid of being the person at the helm when federal funding is withdrawn because Congress is passing things like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And if we see your campus being anti-Semitic, we can withdraw federal funding. They're worried about being the one that loses the donor that's been an important pipeline for money for decades. So it's absolutely about money.
All right, thank you. We have
Jennifer, that answered my question too, because we're a university town and they
Yeah.
don't give up the piles of money they're getting from that.
Yeah.
thank you. We have Abdul Mohsen Farahat. Please unmute yourself. Tell us who you are, where you are, and what you have in mind.
Okay, my name is Abdul Mohsen Farahat from Egypt. I'm speaking from October City. I'm an architect, a landscape architect, university professor for around 40 years. I'm also a painter, and I painted perhaps a dozen of paintings on Palestine in different occasions. I have a comment and then a question. The comment I have is, first of all, I must thank Jennifer and Jane and Janice for their wonderful work. And in my opinion, the documentary film is very valuable. And in professional terms, as much as I can see, every moment of it has its value. So there is no redundancy, there is no extended time without use in the film.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
yeah, really, and I thank you very much for that. The comment I have is there was a university professor of philosophy, maybe considered a philosopher, in 1968, the year of the young or the revolution of the young people in USA, as you all know. And according to his analysis, he said that university students, their opinion is very, very important because they are the one category of society who are least connected to the economic machine.
Mm-hmm.
That is to say that their economic interests, while I must admit that there are always economic interests and economic pressures, even on students, but they are the least category of society who are motivated by these economic motivations. So in my opinion, this is very important. In many ways, they express the consciousness the conscience of society. So this is my comment.
Question.
My question, which is, I must say first that I feel very, very grateful, especially to the Jews who are advocating or fighting for the Palestinian cause. They are very, very precious because they negate the accusation of anti-Semitic, which is silly and only abuse. You all know that. And Arabs are more Semitic than the Jews, by the way. And now the question is, while I see a widening, a very hopeful and very positive widespread movement amongst the Jews all over the world, conscientious Jews for the Palestinian cause, I see a disappointing decline in the consciousness of the Jews inside Israel. There are moral giants, real moral giants in Israel, like Gideon Levy, like Avi Shleim, like and there are several others. I don't remember all the names now. But there seems to be a contradiction here. Yani a widespread of consciousness in the Jews all over the world and a decrease or shrinking of consciousness in the Israeli society. How can this be explained? Thank you.
I think that's very well put. I don't think that Jan and I are the best people to try and answer the disproportionate between people at large, Jewish people at large, becoming aware, especially the younger generation, versus the shrinking of discourse in Israel. That's another documentary, but important one. I mean, I've read things about how much Israelis don't see of what's actually going on. So that they're shocked by the term apartheid, even though it's right, just a few miles from them. So I think that would be a documentary around the news media in Israel, the degree to which people, Jan as a psychoanalyst might speak to the investment and the fear around security and the way that gets overly weaponized, the notion of security. But yeah, I think there are better people for that, probably.
I think the education system in Israel is geared to a certain narrative that they try to preach when the people are very young, all the way through the military and thereafter. We did have a session on it by Norit Pelaid, who was an expert on the Israeli educational system, and a recording of that session is available on our YouTube channel. If you go and you'll find Norit Pelaid speaking about that subject, if that's of interest.
Yeah. Maya Wind, who's is Jewish Israeli and critic of Israel and critic of Zionism, has a wonderful new book called Towers of Ivory and Steel about the educational system there. That covers much of that topic. But I also appreciate your commentary on the role of students historically, and I think much of your beautifully put analysis has guided our thinking as well in making of the film. So I feel we're simpatico there.
Thank you. We have another guest, Felix Alameda. Please unmute yourself. Tell us who you are, where you are, and what you're thinking.
Certainly. Thank you very much for letting me get on. I don't believe that my request is worthy of being put on air, but I do have a comment to add to it. I've been a social justice. I'm calling from Toronto in Canada, Takaronto in Turtle Island. And I've been a social justice activist for Palestine for most of my life, my 47th year now. And I just need to, and I will end with the request I have. Thank you very much, first of all, Jennifer and Jan, for such a great compilation of historical evidence about the Zionist Holocaust of Palestinians. I applaud you for your work, and I thank you very sincerely for it. I've also become very conscious that as we suppress Palestinian voices and pro-Palestinian anything, there is a subtle and pernicious infiltration into any and every venue, be it a mild Zen Buddhist Sangha or a seniors group where Zionist talking points are perpetrated in the guise of sanctity and in the guise of compassion, pseudo-compassion for Palestinians. For example, the LGBTQ plus community in Gaza, this is now a Zionist voice speaking, deserves to be treated with dignity rather than now hear the stereotype being thrown off buildings to meet with their death. So what they're really doing is perpetuating that horrific, unfounded stereotype, while at the same time it serves as a mask for the genocide that they are committing, which pro-Palestinian voices are forbidden to talk about. Or, I'm so glad that our LGBTQ seniors group was able to visit the Aga Khan Museum, which is a Muslim museum in Toronto, because it was a statement to them about of our existence. So I strongly advocate and encourage people to immediately shoot down these stereotypes, because I just jumped right in when she said this yesterday, and I said, that is a stereotype. Are you aware that the Aga Khan Museum hosts gay weddings? And she was very gracious in that she said, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. But her narrative, the Zionist narrative, was already out there. And that's what remains in people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say that to encourage my fellow Palestinian solidarists to stand up for what we believe in at every opportunity we get. And interestingly enough, ironically enough, it is Zionist voices who give us the lead into voicing our opinions. Because as soon as she makes a stereotype statement like that, a very pernicious stereotype statement like that, that opens the door for me to say, I'm sorry, that's a stereotype. So having said that, I'll end very quickly. I admire myself for being succinct. I'm usually very verbose. I just wanted to ask, that theme song at the end, I don't speak Arabic, although I was born and raised in the Middle East, but I've been here for 57 years now. I would really appreciate, because I think I could just feel it in my gut. It encapsulates all that you've been trying to say. And if you could somehow make it available to us in English, that would be the name of the song in Arabic, and then the translation of it in English. If you could put it online for the likes of people like myself, I'd be truly grateful. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
The first thing Faisal said actually after the screening last week was, people need to know, people who don't know Arabic need to know what those lyrics are because they are so spot on. So it's not just the music, but also the lyrics. So thank you for that comment. I think, and Jan's the one who found the song and secured the rights and stuff. So I should let Jan speak to the song. But if I could just say one more thing about your point about the sanctimoniousness that creates such a chilling atmosphere. I think that's so true. And that's an element on higher ed. So our film is about higher ed, right? So we were focusing pretty narrowly relative to all of the different things that that people working on pro-Palestinian issues could have focused on. But their task forces, this is another sort of element for people who want to understand why universities have been so cowed, university presidents. There have been task forces across the nation that have as their sort of methodology to bring people together on campuses around the frame of conflict resolution. And you can see right away, I hope, how disabling that frame is, because it suggests, for example, that someone who is advocating against genocide has a conflict with a Jewish person some of whom are right by their side, right, advocating against the genocide, their Jewish student friends, but who somehow is in conflict with a Zionist here on their campus. It's a bizarre way to kind of just shut everything down under the guise of opening up conversation. So it's another one of those places where you think, okay, I want to talk about this, I want to advocate, and you get in that space and it becomes so bizarrely framed and charged, and that you find it very hard to figure out how to speak up.
Very much so. Thank you for saying that. And I just want to link this to Robin, the book on white fragility, where she talks about, well, anyway, rather than get into that, I'll just get straight to the point. I was in a Zen Buddhist Sangha, and I would publicize movies that were made by an anti-Zionist Jew, an Arab Jew here in Toronto, on decolonization and anti-Zionism. She had made these beautiful documentaries and was opening them up to the public. So on behalf of her, I was publicizing them online with our Sangha. And the head of the Sangha called me, and after a little bit of loosey-floosey kind of chit-chat, he gets to the point. And I was also calling you to ask if you would mind the announcements you've been sending out have been hurting people's feelings. And when I questioned what announcements and specifics, he says, well, actually, there was one person, and he named a Zionist person, who was hurt by it. And, really, Felix, he says, I'm sure someday the two sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, will come to a compromise. And I thought, you know nothing about this. And then he follows that up with, I'd be happy to mediate if you would like to have a discussion with this Zionist person. And I was very, very emphatic and confident in saying no, because we know exactly where that would end up. Because all the power of the media and the quelling of Palestinian voices are on the Zionist side. And he's not there to hear my point of view. He's there to trumpet his own. And so that's another statement I'm making for us to know exactly how to stand up to and defend ourselves against Zionism that pervades our lives. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Rena Grasso, please tell us who you are and where you are. And
Will do. So yes, I'm in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I have been working with a multi-faith coalition. Just this past week, we held an incredibly impactful public hearing before our city council, and nonetheless, for all of the information that we put out, and for the begging by Palestinian mothers, Palestinian grandmothers, our city council voted down our resolution for a ceasefire. This is Massachusetts, the second largest city in Massachusetts. And some of you may also know that in Massachusetts, they are attempting to make a course in anti-Semitism mandatory in school curriculums. So a lot of systemic stuff going on. I hope I'm not too disconnected, but I want to make several comments that might not be connected. First, PSU. I lived in Portland, Oregon in the 90s. And I remember way back in the 90s that Portland State University knew about Palestine. And that was a rare thing at that time. Very rare. I was a real outsider, and so I appreciated moving to Portland and finding that. Not surprised that you created such a wonderful movie. Secondly, somebody in the chat talked about Representative Jim McGovern making a wonderful speech on UNRWA, and humanitarian aid. But people need to know, because it is the point, that Jim McGovern had to be met with. He had protesters in Northampton had to sit in and be arrested in his office. For 7 months, we met with Jim McGovern before he made that speech, and he has yet to call this a genocide. He refuses to use the word genocide. Another point I want to make related to what I think the Egyptian man said about students. And I was a student activist, an anti-war women's movement activist of the 60s. I was a student. Things are different for students now. They are burdened by incredible debt, part of the backlash against the 60s and 70s. It's not quite the same scene. I am not denying that it's important that students become engaged, but I think it's equally important that the mainstream people become engaged. Most people, thanks to the mass media, do not know about the history. And without the history, this issue does not become clear. They don't know. They accept that Hamas is a terrorist organization. So, I feel as I do my work here, that the challenge that I keep thinking of is how do we reach mainstream people? How do we break through the bias that they have, the very calculated, powerful bias that the media has created? Of course, I'm going to continue to do that, but I do think that what we see lying before us with the Trump presidency requires us to think of organizing the people in the way we used to talk about the people. And that means students and workers and making those connections. That's what we are going to be challenged to do. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to me. May the force be with us.
Thanks. We have Michelle Riddell with us. Michelle, please unmute yourself and tell us who you are, where you are, etc.
Hi there. My name is Michelle, and I'm in New Paltz, New York. And I was one of 132 people who were arrested at SUNY New Paltz. I was hoping we'd see it as one of the campuses, but I knew you couldn't do all of them. But we were the 4th biggest in the country. Anyway, the main thing is we were brutalized by the police, and we now have a class action suit against police, the head of the president of the college, and certain state police, because you can't you're not allowed to take all the state police at once, en masse. You have to get individuals. But they had dogs after us, and we had only been I came as a community member just to support the students. And it really was a military state. They said if we took our tents down, we'd be okay. And we took our tents down, and they still brought the dogs, the police, and they my friend who was 84 was dragged like a sack of potatoes and, you know, had to go to the hospital. They were against the, you know, gay community, and apparently they, you know, they molested some of them. And so anyway, we've got this action, this class action suit, and we've started it, and I'm wondering about other colleges, other universities, if they're doing that, because, you know, if what happens when we do it again, you know, and where do we go from here? Also in New Paltz, we have Women in Black standing every week, and most of the people are Jewish, you know, Jews for Peace. So I'm, you know, I'm just really like incensed about this and wanting to do whatever else I can do. And also one of the faculty members told me, who's my good friend, is going to show this film in New Paltz. And, you know, we'll see what happens to her. But, you know, we're going to do that. And, you know, when the campus, when the students come back. So I just wanted to share that and share that I think that I have a friend, Jakov, who told me that there are thousands and thousands of Israelis that are against what's going on. So maybe we can't hear it. And we saw this movie, When Olive Trees Weep, and a documentary, and the Jews were on one side of the fence, and the Palestinians were on the other. The Israeli Jews and the Palestinians were on the other side of the fence, and they were protesting together. And the Israelis got arrested, and the Palestinians got killed, most of them, a lot of them. And there was like 1,000 of, so I don't know exactly, but if you see the movie, you know, you can hear it, the documentary. And I think that we have a lot of Jews maybe in Israel that feel this way and also are terrified. So I wouldn't say that they aren't there. And the one other thing is I'm asking the directors here, you know, what you think we should do next is really an important thing to see. What should we do? What should we do on campuses? What should we do? And the lady that just talked before about sitting in the office for 6 months, I think we should do that. And I told, the other thing is about Zionists. How can Jews be considered anti-Semitic? And what if en masse Jewish people go to their representatives and say, you know, hey, this is genocide? Are they going to say all these Jews are anti-Semitic? So that's a few questions, but thank you very much.
The scary thing is I think they are going to say all these Jewish people are anti-Semitic. I mean, that's what they're working on. They're working on legally making a commitment to Zionism part of Jewish identity, religious identity, so that it's a protected category, so that you can't criticize it. That's what's happening with the Office of Civil Rights. Lobbying groups are trying to get that across, and it worked in California. A judge ruled that criticism of Zionism is discrimination against a protected category, which, as in our film, Judith Butler says, it makes a mockery of the category of protected identity. So, but yeah, that's the scary thing, absolutely, that they will do that, especially under Trump. Well, as for what's next, I think the class actions I think it's hard to know what under Trump is going to happen. But I think the most promising things to me are the class action suits. Like, and someone last week was telling me about New Paltz, and that's fantastic. Class action suits like that, using the same legal means that they're weaponizing to push back and create counter pressure. So, for example, so many Jewish students have been encouraged by the conservative Jewish Federation leagues, different groups to file discrimination complaints at their university, while so many Palestinian students are so used to being erased and invisible, and Arab students and discriminated against, that it doesn't occur to them. But some of them are starting to make similar kinds of anti-Palestinian racism discrimination complaints. And the Office of Civil Rights has to look at those just as seriously as it looks at the anti-Semitism complaints. So there's a way to use the system against the way it's now being used, or to create a counter narrative to the way that it's being used. And so I think all of those are really worthwhile, on top of organizing coalitions, what the last speaker said and what you just said around, coming together and doing actions, doing actual direct actions.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have More Mizell. More, please unmute yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from there. And
Hi guys. So thank you, Faisal. Thank you for this movie, of course. Thank you, Jennifer. It's always good to see these things and to gain perspective. I like coming to the Palestine Museum because it's the one time a week I get to feel like myself. I'm from Jerusalem, and I am Jewish, and I spend my days unlearning and relearning. The Palestine Museum documentaries every weekend are part of the relearning. I want to stress something that maybe only a Jewish person can say, is that it's not just the Palestinian exception. I don't have any problem with the title. The exception here is the Jewish people. And I will target specifically religion in what I'm about to say, because I think my standing opinion used to be that Jews don't know, so they can't do anything about it. And if they knew more about what was happening in the occupied territories on the West Bank and Gaza, or if they knew what was happening within this war, within this genocide, there would be more outrage. People would be doing something. Proof right now is that this is not the case. People know, and I am surrounded by family, friends, and just online people who actively watch and actively take joy in what's going on. Now, I'm not going to say this is the majority and we need to wipe out all the Israelis, because that would be crazy and that would be lumping us all together. But the fact is that it's there. So I try to look underneath and see what's the underlying, what's at the core of all this. And what is at the core of all this is dehumanization. And the dehumanization happens so much more easily. It's so much easier to be able to not see ourselves as the oppressor after we've been oppressed and we've undergone a genocide, because the Bible is involved, because Torah, because I was just in a tour today with Ir Amim, which is a great organization. They do geopolitical tours. We went specifically to see regarding the house demolitions in Silwan, which is a neighborhood outside the old city of Jerusalem. There are hundreds of house demolitions already happening and scheduled to happen in 2025. And I can't not stress enough that the people taking part in these house demolitions, allowing them to happen, and the people taking over the spaces created by kicking out Palestinians are hinging all of this just anti-humanitarian acts on the Bible. So it's important to have this in mind when talking to Jews and Israelis about what's going on. It's important to see it, and it's important to understand that when there's like this stamp of kosher approval, you can get away with almost anything. For example, just you guys talked about a little bit here. There was a bit of a discussion about how can you say that the Jews who are anti-Zionism are what's the word? Oh, and anti-Semitic. And some people will actually use the word Erev Rav, which is Hebrew. It's like biblical for the people when they left Egypt, when Jews had exited, well, when Israelites exited Egypt, there were the people, Egyptians, who tagged along, who were not of the tribe of Israel, and they were the ones who made trouble for the Israelites in the desert. So people will call people like me, they will call us that. So it just always circles back. I could speak to people who are completely atheist or completely not religious, and that when we talk about what's going on in Gaza, they will always come back to this story of Amalek, where Amalek was the one that we needed to kill off the children, and we didn't, and now we're suffering. So like keep that in mind. I'm not trying to be anti-Jewish here, but it is an important concept to understand when we're trying to realize how it's so easy to demonize, it's so easy to vilify and dehumanize Palestinians. And I think that's what makes this live stream genocide so exceptional, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody on the panel? All right, thank you. We move to Abdel Mohsen. You wanted to come back. I suspect you want to talk about the song. It's an Egyptian song, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it fits also a comment on Moore, because what Moore said is very important. First of all, about the song, the repeated line in the song is, this is one case, but the other is another case. It's basically talking about the double standards that prevails, especially the Western world. In this occasion and in relation to what Moore mentioned, I think many Jews don't know how similar the beliefs of the Muslims are to them, and also Christians, by the way. I don't know how many Christians, for example, know that the most respected woman who have ever been created by God is Mary the Virgin, according to Muslim belief. So, and I don't know how many Jews know that we regard Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, in a very, very high status amongst the prophets. And we do believe that the Pharaoh of that time was a wrongdoer and one of the worst, how should I say it, infidels in history. I am Egyptian. I'm proud of my ancient Egyptian grandfathers, ancestors, but I do believe that the Pharaoh of that time was the wrongdoer and the Egyptians of that time were the wrongdoers. And according to Muslim belief, this is Muslim. We like to think that Prophet Moses and the Jews of the time of Prophet Moses were part of the message of Islam that reached maturity later on with the Holy Quran. But anyway, let us leave that for a moment. The more important is the intellectual thinking. And in this regard, I would recommend Ibn Arabi, who is a great Sufi Muslim. And he wrote about the unity of humanity, And he has a beautiful, very beautiful and famous poem wrote 700 years ago, talking about how he used to be biased for his own faith. And then he realized the importance of embracing all people from any faith, including the atheists. He did not say, I am converting from Islam. No. This is from the Islamic point of view. To embrace all people from all faiths and love them. And his last line was, I adopt the religion of love to wherever its caravans may lead to. Love is my religion and my belief. Thank you very much.
Evelyn, do you have something to say? I know Faisal had to step aside.
Yes, I want to thank both of you, Jen and Janice, for making this film. I have to say, as a Jew, it's so hard to know the truth. I hear so much from both sides. And I think what would really be helpful is maybe hearing from Jewish, I'm not saying to take sides, but to hear actually voices from Jewish students who are Zionists at the campus, to hear what they actually feel. And these are people that are just, that are just students. And I think these are the people that, okay, that I can't quite put my head around, but why I think this would help. I do think it's really important to have the pro-Israeli and the pro-Israeli and the pro-Palestinian talk together on the campuses. And so I was really curious about the term conflict resolution, how that's being perverted, or what term would you use to bring students together? Because I'm always trying to think in how can we move forward so that there's justice in the Middle East for all. So I'm always trying to think of ways to bring people together without one side voice not being heard.
The problem with bringing two sides, pro-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, is it suggests an equivalence that doesn't exist. Israel is a state, Palestinians don't have a state, Israel has an army, Palestine doesn't. It also suggests that you were going to talk about the Shoah on one hand and the Nakba on the other, when in fact, the Shoah existed, and then the Nakba dispossessed Palestinians from their land. Both of those things are true, but the injustice in this scenario is on this side. It's not the Nazis and the Germans, it's what happened with the Haganah and others. So it creates this equivalence, and it creates this kind of both sides have a good point, and we just need to resolve our differences, which also feels, I think, probably to people who've been engaged in this fight for so long in so many different ways, a kind of an insult to how hard people have been working to solve this problem. And the idea that students on campus or faculty who know maybe a portion of what other people know could come together and figure out peace seems incredibly naive. So it seems much more important for campuses to be doing education around the things that our students don't know. So for example, when I ask my students, how many of you, one of the narratives that you see a lot is that we need more these crazy students, we need more education about the Holocaust. Clearly they don't know. They do know. I've had to tell board members, they do know, and that's precisely why they've learned not in our name and not again, never again. That's why they're saying that, is that they do know about the Shoah. When I ask my students, how many of you know about the Nakba? Maybe I get one hand, right? So it's the both sides things and the conflict resolution thing suggest that there's an equality of opponents and it can be resolved locally. This is a geopolitical issue around justice. The other problem with conflict resolution, while we all want peace and we all want ceasefire and demilitarization, there's different rhetorical ways to go about it. Peace without justice just means quietism and the status quo for Palestinians, or the elimination of Palestinians. So the whole setup kind of skews things. And as far as the Jewish students on campus, I really feel like their fears are real, and their fears are not actually real. That's what I feel like. I feel like their fears are being pumped up by people around them. They're being made to feel as if they're the ones who are vulnerable and getting bombed, when that's not the case. Like the MIT I have not heard for calls for genocide of Jewish people on our campus. I have never heard for those calls. So the fact that Jewish students are being told that that's what these students are saying, that's the problem. So you almost want to say, you're being told that there's a monster in the dorm room next to you. There's not a monster. An adult doesn't tell a kid, you know, they're scared to jump into their bed. Yeah, there is a monster under your bed, but we just have to come together with the monster and talk it out. So this is kind of my way of looking at that.
Can I just ask a question then? How would you reframe it? Because I still think personally, it's so important that that's one of the reasons that I attend. I'm Jewish and I lived in Israel for 13 years, that I come to learn more, and I have learned so much. I still think the only way, for example, for me, is to talk directly to people and hear their stories. So maybe the word, I think that's what I asked in my question in the chat, that maybe conflict resolution is not the right word or not the right. So my question really in the chat was to reframe it so that there is a way that we're not talking about equality, but we're talking in a way that people can come together to talk. Is there a possibility for that? What do you think?
I don't know if there's
Jan?
time to just comment. I'm a psychologist, been involved in conflict resolution settings for decades. And I agree with Jennifer that often psychology is used to overly personalize and obscure political problems and treat them as though they're psychological when they are actually political problems. At the same time, I was drawn into this medium of the documentary because it does provide some of what you're calling for, that there's a documentary, it has a point of view. We really try to open space for conflict, for people going through a different process over time and coming to terms with this history, different emotional and personal narratives combined with collective history. And so people can come together, and so the film is kind of like what we call psychologists the third term. It's kind of something people can focus on to avoid a direct frontal confrontation. And to acknowledge, as I have with students over the years, how if you come out of a background of white privilege and you're living during a period of Black resistance to oppression, it stirs up a lot, and it can be anxiety provoking for people in a movement. But kind of, I try to empathize with how many fears and anxieties get stirred up, but that's a good thing to feel upset and unsettled. So I kind of relabel some of the fear is, yeah, we're all feeling unsettled, and some of things you've cared about and believed deeply and held dearly now are being kind of shaken. And that's how people grow and change. So I kind of reinterpret some of that in an empathic way, you know, but also use the film as a space to open up some of, I think, what you're trying to get at here without turning it into a conflict resolution situation, which I agree with Jennifer completely, is a retreat from a political problem.
Well, thank you very much. I have to think about that. I mean, I'm not laughing because it's not funny at all. It's so tragic.
Yeah.
And thank you again. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.
Thank you, Evelyn. We have Michelle Galboin. You could tell us how to pronounce that. Please unmute yourself and tell us where you're from and etc.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, yes.
I'll just show you this a lady over here. That's my mother, Scheindel Bazansky. My Jewish name is Adel Bracha. It's actually Shabbos right now. It's the Sabbath. And if I was really, really Orthodox, I wouldn't be looking at this computer. I go to an Orthodox shul, and I want to speak to more, especially, I want to tell her that I don't understand why they're saying a Moloch. I think it's so evil to use our beautiful Yiddishkeit and to corrupt it and use it as a somehow an excuse for the evil that's being done to the Palestinians, the children, and the people. When I see the Palestinian men saying their prayers and the mothers, it's just incredible that we Jews who have suffered so much are doing this. And the gentleman who said that we Jews are just like the Muslims, that's absolutely true. I understand that very deeply. We women are not really required to pray. It's the men, and women actually have many restrictions. We're very, very close, and I think where you will be, we will be. We're always together. We're the children of Abraham, and I think that this is horrible. I don't want my name, my father's name, Oliver Shalom, was Tzvi Hersh Gelboim. Our name is really a Yiddish name. There was a time in my life when I wasn't even pronouncing it correctly because I didn't want it to sound Jewish. I converted to Christianity for a while. I actually believe in reincarnation, that I've been a soul who's been Muslim before and Christian and as a Jew. And I think that this is a terrible time for our people. It's a terrible shame, and it must stop. The killing must stop. I wish that I could go there and somehow go there and help the children who are suffering. It's heartbreaking what the Israeli military is doing, and with the permission of the United States and the money, it's just so incredibly evil, and it's completely against all the prayers. This is my father's sitter. My father's sitter. He was Harry V. Gelboim. He was a scientist for NIH who died in 2010. And he told me he was on the side of the Arabs because Israel had not treated them right and they had a reason to be angry. He was the leader of our family. We say prayers all the time, asking God to protect the weak against the strong, against the ones who steal, from the thieves, the ones who were robbed of their homes. We didn't know any of this. It was the Holocaust. My mother, that old lady, was sitting in Gloversville, New York. Her father was a glover. That was one of the Jewish professions what was permitted in Poland. That was Russia at the time. And they were worried about their relatives, their family during the Holocaust. And then at Hillel and college, how they were singing Israel was the great savior. It was, finally we had our own homeland, the promised land, and to have the truth of it come forth, and to have it become this horrible shame upon our people, that I don't know how we can recover from this ever. It's just, I can hardly bear it. And I did participate in the encampment, which had many Jews and many Palestinians that felt like, at last, we're going to have our state. We're going to be able to, at last, what we've been waiting for and suffering for. And it sounded just like the Jews. This is just the worst time. And I'm very grateful to be able to participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your joining us and your comments. Certainly very touching.
Thank you.
Well, I think we
Sing with my mother.
everybody an opportunity to speak who wanted to speak. So, and it's getting late, and I have some visitors in the museum here I need to tend to. So we want to wrap up. Tomorrow, though, we have a madafe, which means guest house in Arabic. We usually host a guest, and our guest tomorrow is Yael Khan. She is actually an Israeli who lives in London. I met her in London. She's a Palestine activist, a staunch activist. She was arrested a week ago in London, at some sort of a demonstration, and she's been arrested before. Every time I see her, she has two big Palestinian flags behind her she's carrying. And she's a very interesting person. Her family were Holocaust survivors. So we will host her tomorrow at the same time, and we hope that some of you would join us to hear what she has to say and get to know her. One other subject we need to address someday is the power of donors in colleges, and how colleges and universities are so quickly willing to serve the whims and the needs of these donors at the expense of freedom of speech, and at the expense of academic freedom, and a lot of other things. I personally had a experience with a college I went to, and I was on the board of trustees. And as a trustee, you're always encouraged to make, significant donations to the college. And I did make a donation of a chair, a full professor chair, and the president of the college refused it because I insisted on naming the chair as the Rachel Corrie Chair. And they will not allow the name Rachel Corrie, who was an American activist, a young American activist, be used for the chair. And they forego a huge amount of money to the detriment of students who were going to benefit from having that professorship in a subject that they did not have enough faculty, at least not enough senior faculty. So these kind of things are happening all the time, and we need to put an end to them. So that could be another film. And like they say in the song, Tilka Qadiyya. Well, that's another story. All right.
I'd love to talk to you about that at some point, because the Journal of Academic Freedom, which I used to be a faculty editor of, but I'm not right now, but they put out a call for papers around this very issue. And some people, I'm working with some people in our FSJP chapter to write something, but I'd also like to write up your story around wanting to create a chair and being refused. Yeah, I think people need to hear these stories. Thank you for telling us that.
The vice president of advancement of the college tried to reach me. He was going to visit in Connecticut and wanted to meet with me, and I did not bother to return their call. As far as I'm concerned, they can get lost. I've already paid my dues to them. I gave them more money than they gave me, and I was very insulted, and I resigned from the board of trustees at the time. After that, I had the option of going to the student body and making a big deal out of it and have a lot of turmoil, but I chose not to do that. And I found some other outlets for the money. So, and I'm glad I did that. But yeah, I'm happy to work with you on that. Well, thanks everyone. We hope to see some of you tomorrow, and Krista will be back tomorrow, so that they make my job a little bit easier. We look forward to seeing you, for those who don't come tomorrow, and another film next week. Hopefully we'll find something interesting to show. And like we say always, as-salama, goodbye in Arabic.
Thank you so much. Bye, Zol and everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.